very warm welcome this afternoon, and to all of you who are joining us online. This next session is called Green Upskilling, the Next Generation of Climate Skills and Leadership. And the conversation is going to be led by the co-founder of Apolitical, Robyn Scott. So ladies and gentlemen, we're just going to play a short video. I want to thank Morgan Stanley for supporting this session. Play a short video, and then Robyn will lead the team up onto stage. Thank you.
I'm Audrey Choi, Chief Sustainability Officer at Morgan Stanley and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Investing. Welcome to the New York Times Climate Hub, taking place alongside COP26. The health of our planet is now the existential issue for business leaders and government leaders alike. The important conversations happening here in Glasgow are a critical catalyst for the actions we need to take to stem the long-term effects of climate change. Clearly, the time for action is now. To begin, I'd like to share with you some of our best thinking on one of the topics we're here to discuss. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
We now find that 85% of individual investors are interested in sustainable investing. Among millennials, the interest is even stronger. One of the big trends in sustainable investing is data and the ability to understand how sustainable your investments are. By taking that information into account, investors can make better decisions for the long term. Sustainability is not about one number. It's about variables like water usage, data privacy, consumer trust, diversity, land use, and conservation. All types of investors are now considering this in their investment decisions. This is not niche. $1 in $4 globally is following some form of sustainable investing. With sustainable investing at this scale, there's power to change the markets and have an impact on the issues investors care about most. I am Courtney Thompson, and we are Morgan Stanley.
I'm just waiting for our panelists online to appear. There they are. Excellent. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a pleasure to be moderating this important conversation on green skills. Tackling the climate challenge requires rewiring our economies and our societies, and that is not going to happen without the biggest upskilling that we've seen since we had to go from a paper world to a digital world. And we have fantastic panelists here to shine a light on that challenge across a wide range of backgrounds. We have Marie Macklin, a green entrepreneur. We have Meredith Adler, a youth climate leader. We have Renee Lertzman behind me, a climate-focused psychologist, and Emmanuel Faber, a former corporate CEO. So a real diversity of backgrounds. And just before I turn over to them, I want to give a little context for why I'm excited to be having this representing the government angle today. I'm co-founder and CEO of Apolitical, which is an online network and learning platform for government used by about 150,000 policymakers and public servants in 160 different countries. And we recently asked our members who are not working directly on climate policy how important they thought it was that they did. And we asked them to answer on a scale of 1 to 5. And the average was 3.7, much higher than we expected it to be. So public servants not working on climate want to work on climate, whether they're in education, agriculture, tourism, or so forth. But when we asked them what the biggest barrier was, they said it was access to the right skills and knowledge. So we at Apolitical have set ourselves a challenge to upskill 50,000 public servants across 10 of the top 20 emitters by 2025. And it's fantastic to have this conversation on a day that we announced a collaboration with Oxford Net Zero and the Smith School at Oxford University to create courses on net zero to help public servants help their countries hit their targets. And also to make sure that government supports, or at least doesn't get in the way of the fantastic work that my fellow panelists are all doing. Now with that, I'm going to turn over to them and instead of a general introduction, ask them each to answer 2 specific questions. And Meredith, I'll start with you. First, what brought you here and made you think this was the most important thing to work on? And second, just explain the specific problem you're trying to solve.
Thank you. So I, from a very young age, was actually obsessed with the idea of youth empowerment and young people being able to take on large scales, and ended up having the pleasure of living internationally and understanding how there are a few key things that really tie together people, and became very passionate about human rights. But as I kind of dove into those topics, really realized that there were core systems that were keeping us from achieving those goals on equity, and one of which is really the energy system, is your access to energy and how that can really determine so much of your life. And so, long story short, I ended up working with Student Energy, and we work globally with young people on skill and capacity building, and specifically on uniting young people globally, but also giving them the tools to really rise to the occasion of being the next generation of energy leaders who can really implement energy solutions that solve climate challenges. And for me, I think the core challenge here is that often we're hearing governments and others talk about, oh, good news, this policy is going to produce X amount of jobs. You know, the IEA says the energy transition will result in about 55 million jobs when you look at all of it together. But really very few people are focused on the skill building. There's lots of announcements around the money for deployment, but not around who will be the deployers. And so my core challenge and the thing that we work to do is how do you do training at scale that's globally applicable. And so we work really hard on teaching problem-solving skills, teaching deployment skills, and the things that people need to know in order to be able to learn and culturally adapt to what needs to happen, because otherwise we just won't hit our deployment targets. And I think young people also globally, something I'm very passionate about is young people have really risen to the challenge. I think a lot of the political announcements you see are coming from future concerns about where future voters and consumers are headed. But unfortunately, we're not carving clear pathways, and the university system isn't going fast enough. And so there's a huge opportunity to move outside of that and focus on experiential education to make sure that young people can be a really active part of this.
Fantastic, thank you. Marie, tell us your why and your problem.
I'm here because of people and community. I marched with 20,000 in 2009 to save 700 jobs in my hometown in a deprived community where I grew up. And those 700 jobs were in the Johnnie Walker bottling plant, which was a contaminated site. And for 13 years, my community and I have been creating the Halo Effect, the Halo Project, a £65 million project to realign our economy and create new digital and cyber skills for our young people, to create that new tomorrow's world for our children's children. And what do you do when that PLC failed to negotiate? Do you stand back? No, you take control of that site. And over 13 years, trying to get access to finance and bringing governments together and able to create 1,500 jobs has been an uphill struggle. But I'm pleased to say that that halo effect has now happened, and we have this huge project in Kilmarnock on the west coast that's been visited by Israeli ministers last week. Iberdrola, one of our main partners that I'll explain later, Robyn. We're all at the forefront of community urban regeneration, and I talk about for the love of the people and bringing heart of those people into these urban contaminated sites. And we've created the first net zero carbon emission site in Scotland that will create these new jobs and these new skills. For our lost boys and girls, the young people who have fallen off the end, the young people that will not manage to get to university, that's all I am all about, is creating that new tomorrow's world for them, Robyn.
Fantastic. It is such inspiring work. Renee, turning over to you, you bring a very different perspective to this. Your why and the challenge that you're excited about working on.
Thank you. I'm so honored and excited to be here with you all from Northern California. So my why is, I guess I would say, a recognition of what these issues and crises are calling on us to grow into and to evolve into. And so it started for me very early on when I was a psychology major in college and university, and I was starting to learn more about climate and environmental crises, and specifically what scientists, advocacy orgs, charities, and so forth were trying to do. And I recognized there was this really profound gap. And the gap was appreciating and understanding the psychological, existential complexity of these issues. And so when we talk about how do we make change happen, what I call existential change management, is really about what additional insights, research, tools can we be just very opportunistically applying, and seeing psychology, specifically psychodynamic, neuroscientific psychology, as just this treasure trove. And how do we translate that? So for me, the problem that I'm working to address is quite basic. How can we be more effective? How can we have more impact when it comes to bringing more people together, creating a genuinely inclusive approach that requires a level of our ability, our meaning those working on the issues, to learn how to be attuned, to learn how to listen, to have empathy for those that we're seeking to engage, even when they are seemingly not engaged or have very different perspectives. How do we develop and learn those skills and apply them in a very practical and scaled way?
Fantastic. And finally, Emmanuel, you have led some inspiring and probably groundbreaking work in your former role at Danone. Can you also tell us your why?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess I realized in 2005, reading a commencement speech by Ray Anderson, the CEO and chair of Interface in the US, that was the largest tile manufacturer, that they had decided to become carbon neutral. And I was flying over the Groenland at that point in time. I looked out at this wonderful nature out, and coming back to this paper, I said to myself, my God, if these guys can do that, we should, and there is no reason, and we should absolutely do the same. And then the journey started. It took me 4 years, and it took us collectively 4 years to just be able to come to grips with this realization that Renee was just talking about as an executive committee, that was possible and that was important. How to shorten this 5 years period has been my why, ever since. We certainly had some successes in many ways. And one of my theory of change is what I'm working on really today are two things. One, the hardware, which is the metrics of that language. There is an alphabet soup about climate and nature and everything. And in large companies on the financial markets, we need metrics, and I'm supporting metrics to be coming so that we can speak a common language. And the second is on the software. I'm absolutely convinced that the younger generation in the employees, the workforce of the large companies and investors are the ones that are going to make that change. So I'm trying to support those movements, and we can elaborate on that.
Fantastic, thank you. So I want to, Meredith, come back to you. You mentioned that you don't think skills are high enough on the agenda, these critical enabling piece of the puzzle. Has that been the case at this COP26 as well? Was it changing?
No, I think it's definitely the case at COP26 as well, and I think it comes, it comes in a few different angles. One is typically world leaders and business leaders do not take the youth piece seriously, and it's not just about youth engagement, but it's also about believing in young people as the delivery of this. And the global average age is just under 30. And so if you're not actually working with young people, it's very hard to say you'll actually meet your climate goals. And I think specifically, COP has been and is a very elitist space, and there's been a lot of chat about that at this COP with the costs particularly, but that's not new. And I think that and I think that a lot of things can be focused on announcement after announcement, but not a ton of data on deliverables, and not as much thinking through what are the partnerships that are going to get us there, and how do we actually make sure that young people are in the fold. I think another big misconception is, being so inspired by all the youth activists as so many of us are, but really thinking like, oh, it's okay, they're gonna solve this, but they actually don't have the money or the power to do that. And you actually do need the knowledge that has built the energy system, that has built the climate system we have today, to help unlock how you do those solutions. And so there's a huge opportunity for intergenerational collaboration. But I think a big blind spot in terms of, yes, money, mobilizing the money is important, governments making commitments are important, but also forming collaborations with the people who will fulfill the commitments and spend the dollars is really important, and also trusting them to be part of that process is hugely important. I think young people are often felt like we're so far left out of the conversation and not taken seriously, and half the success, honestly, of student energies programs is just having high expectations and believing that young people can actually deliver a project or a solution, and we see it happen time and time again. It's been fantastic that way.
So what does a perfect collaboration look like for student energy? If you could magically create any you wished for, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, it changes on geography by geography, but I think, some of our perfect collaborations, I'll give you an example of one of our students, Brian Kikimbo, who's actually here, I think, today. So Brian was able to come to our International Student Energy Summit in 2015 from Uganda. He went up to a speaker who is an expert on waste to energy and was like, how do I do this? And he did this as a business student. And the speaker was like, well, you're from Uganda. Like, there's a waste problem, there's an energy problem. Maybe you can put the two together. And just that simple moment of mentorship. He went home as a business student, started working with the engineering department on how to build a clean burning briquette from street trash picked up in Uganda. He then got a first volunteer, now staff group of 200 youth to go and be part of this collection process, building these briquettes, and now he has over 2,000 customers in Kampala, and he's providing a clean cooking solution, which is a core issue for so many people living there. And this is just one example, but often what you see with young people and what you see with these great collaborations is really someone who has been in the field for a long time, who can identify problems, helps guide a young person to that problem, and then you're able to put it together with a coaching system is often what student energy offers, someone who believes in you and helps you keep working through problems. And then the right mentors don't have to show up, day in and day out, but regularly being able to access expertise and draw those connections together is a really big part of how this happens. And we've seen this happen with governments, we've seen this happen with very large corporations. The model works, and it's very scalable. It's just a matter of people being open to helping identify those challenges that young people can leverage to start to build their problem-solving skill set.
Fantastic. And Marie, what is the biggest bottleneck to scaling your work? It's so demonstrably fantastic, so valuable to the communities in which you work. Why isn't more money being channeled your way?
It's a question I ask myself every day. But I would say, sorry.
I was actually meaning that one for Marie. But
I'm sorry.
Why don't you
go ahead?
I think I'll hand over to Marie, and then you answer it too.
Because I apologize.
It's fine. I come from a community, as I explained earlier, that was hard hit, and there's millions of these communities across the globe. And it comes down to finance and a belief. And our project took 13 years because of pure bureaucracy and legislation. But somebody had to jump. And in 2018, Scottish Power, under the chairmanship of Chief Exec Keith Anderson, heard about Halo. And he had the foresight to say, what can we do to help? So they entered into a 5-year partnership. So I'm all about bringing PLC UK into these deprived communities to help grow new businesses, scale up businesses, and create training and opportunity to reskill workforces and our kids in deprived communities. So when you manage to get one big company like Iberdrola and Scottish Power to enter into £1 million a year to help finance the Halo sites as testbed sites, that allowed us to come up with a 60,000 kilowatt solar panel system. a 50 kilowatt battery backup, transport solutions to bring young people in an electric bus into the Halo for that education and opportunity. It's allowing us to create a Halo Rock Me floor where new starts and scale-up businesses can be based in a town on a 20-acre site, where we have a housing strategy with homes that will be data collected and help with fuel poverty. It's about new companies coming in. Candice, a new company that's coming into Kilmarnock, 2 entrepreneurs that have decided we don't want the cities, we want to be in the local economies, and these guys want to create 150 new jobs in their first year. It's down to finance. I welcome Mark Carney's 100 trillion offer. And my call to Mark Carney today is this. We have a solution. The solution is our communities and the people that we work with. And my call to Mr. Carney and all the financiers along the globe is 100,000 people walked in Glasgow to create that new tomorrow's world for our children's children. My call is here. Give me 100 million to start that process throughout the whole of the UK, that halo light of hope in the top of our building, and we will see a huge change to reskilling our young people that have fell off the other end. Tonight is now.
Exactly. Meredith, do you want to take the opportunity to ask for money too from Mark Carney?
I mean, Mark, we could definitely chat. That'd be great. I mean, I would just really echo this. I think that philanthropy and governments have been very far removed from community for a long time, and often that also is with young people. And I think specifically, I would also call on the philanthropic community to really broaden the tent on who you even speak to and who has access to talk to folks who actually have been stewarding these resources for generations, often on the backs of these communities.
Yeah, clearly the challenge is not that the representatives of young people aren't speaking, it's that the right people with money aren't listening to you.
Perhaps.
I was also struck in the preparation for this about comments around how important these green skills are for excluded young men. Mm-hmm. And we know the challenges to politics and democracy and populism that excluded young men pose. So this has all kinds of collateral benefits as well.
It does. I mean, I talk about the lost boys and lost girls. We need to look at our education system. There's kids falling off the education system. They will never get a chance to come to Glasgow. They don't come out of their own postcode area. And whether I'm working in Belfast between the Falls and the Shankill and creating a new halo so that that building can bring young people in that will then allow them the confidence and training work with some big companies to go down to the fantastic Titanic Quarter in Belfast. These are the communities that we need to engage with and bring back into the fold and give them opportunity. And unless we do that across the world, whether it's New York, whether it's Ballymena, Belfast, Blackpool, Europe, the global economy, we will never succeed in achieving the targets that these people are setting. It's people that make change, not politicians.
Absolutely. Emmanuel, I want to turn to you. I was reading some extraordinary figures around the corporate workforce, which where 76% of employees say that they are ready to take action on climate change, and 1 in 10 employees have considered leaving their jobs in order to have a more direct impact on climate change. Now, we're seeing in white-collar roles how powerful the employee voice is becoming with all the walkouts and protests in tech companies, for example. What do you think employers need to do to stay ahead of this and take advantage of that willingness?
Well, I don't think they can stay ahead of it. They will always be behind. And so be it. But the point is that I don't think that there is a lack of the word of climate skills when it comes to leaders, economic leaders. For me, it's not about skills. It's about a genuine awareness, profound, personal awareness, a kind of a eureka moment where they realize that there is something which is a huge issue coming, and that we are going to be, whether we like it or not, part of the problem or part of the solution. It's a personal choice. So either you are in power and you want to stay in power, and probably you don't take the risk, or you are in power but you think that it's a moment where you need to exercise leadership, and then you have this eureka moment and you start moving. So what I'm trying to solve, and what I have seen certainly in my life, is that very much what Renee was sharing, it's a personal journey where you need to be touched not with your brain. I mean, CEOs, I assume, tend to be more than average IQ. What's missing is the deep connection, the deep awareness as a human being with their body, not even their soul. I'm really talking everything. To realize that we are part entirely, each and every of us have this shared responsibility of continuing to honor life despite everything that we've done so far. And once you have that, then I am immensely confident that the private sector, companies basically, will find solutions, because this is what they are good at: organizing collective work, gathering skills, knowledge, information. I mean, there are tons of information and about climate and and nature and biodiversity and the social injustice that's going to be there, the inequalities. You just need to be willing to look at them, to just look at them and then take stock and walk. My point is that as I said to start with, employees, because they are 25 years old, because they are 30 years old, they will always be ahead of us, of my generation. And we need to recognize that and to put our future in their hands. And I truly believe that, and we've done that at Danone. I've organized a 100,000 people consultation every year on the 2030 goals of the company. And 90% of employees responded. 30% of them, 30,000 people, raised their hands to say, I want to be part of the people that are going to make analytics about this and report back to the board about it. And so my call is really that we CEOs, we corporate leaders, need to be much more confident in the fact that the employees that are demanding that we work faster on these topics, they are not here to destroy the company. They are here because they love this company and because they strongly believe, and they know that better than us, then 10, 20, 30 years is going to go very fast. And if we want this company to still be alive, if they want to still have jobs, we need to move, and we need to move the strategy of the company. And so what I'm supporting right now is all this collective of employees that have been created around the world, and certainly in France. There is a huge movement of employee collectives that we actually brought to the COP26 to share their experience on how, between companies and among companies, these employees are talking to each other to basically go and discuss with their management about opening these routes and embracing that both climate and social transition that needs to occur.
Fantastic. I want to come to Renee in a second to ask for her perspective. But before I do, I'd like to give Marie and Meredith the opportunity to challenge Emmanuel if you think that thinking is not bold enough. Or maybe it is. What do you reckon?
I mean, I think it's on the right track. I think one thing that people are challenged by within green jobs and green skills is that ultimately everyone needs this skill set. But I think that, we can be a lot bolder than just one company at a time or different entities in different countries. And I think this is where actually we need to really look at employee empowerment and empowerment of young people within these fields, and how are CEOs reporting back on the calls that their young people are making, and how are we also building the skill building kind of beyond those companies. Because I think one of the core issues from an equity perspective of green jobs is that right now, if you want a job with sustainability in your title, you have to network your way into that job. And networking is often a core barrier, because if you don't go to the right school, if you didn't have the right family, you can't get in. And so I think we also need to make sure that kind of all jobs are starting to learn this skill set, but then also that companies are really pushing themselves to bring in new types of people and widen the tent. COP is a very white space, and this whole panel is as well. And I think it is something that we really actively need to work on fixing and changing, and making sure that our call for sustainability is not just one of, oh yes, we did employee engagement, but we did one of employee empowerment, and we reached out to our communities and new types of people to be part of it.
I mean, I think for me, it's the lower skill set. There's a huge opportunity here. Digital cyber, it's quite frightening how far we're behind. But how do I get a chief exec to give opportunities to young people in the community? And if you take the attitude that we've got the first Barclays Eagle Lab to come to Kilmarnock outside the city to grow businesses, that's a huge testament of confidence in that local skill base and young people. But for me, it's about corporate social responsibility. When you look at their budgets, they need to start aligning that budget. We all write checks for charity, and that's amazing. But let's start using that budget, realign it into a new skill set and job set for people at the lower and mid-market. I work with graduates, I mentor. I was that kid that was kept back at school, wasn't the most articulate, so I totally get it. And it's time that we created a new pipeline of talent, a new army of young people at the forefront of creating that digital and cyber economy built around that green economy. But we need PLCs to come on board, work with us, and the financiers. 13 years, I remind you, it took me to get £7.5 million to fund a £65 million project. If we have to spend another 13 years to get a pittance of 7.5, we will never reach the targets, and our young people will be failed, and our communities will be failed.
Heard shocking figures. Emmanuel, those employee collectives sound super powerful potentially. Could you give an example of something, an issue that a youth employee collective has brought to senior management that's resulted in change?
Yes, many, and actually at Danone that was the case because they started a long time ago. And in particular, that's been the case on plastic bottles and how we should accelerate. We landed 3 years ago a 2 billion euro acceleration plan on climate. A third of that was about exiting fossil virgin plastic from the bottles and the cups that we're using by 25 in Europe and globally later. And that was really driven by employees and by the call of employees, because the governance process I was describing was actually that those representatives of employees were going to meet not only the executive committee, but also the board members. And the board would report back to them about what had been changed every year in updating the strategic plan of the company. So now I know of other collectives, and in France there is one in the tire industry, where the collective have actually called for, it was very good to have a much lower carbon footprint tires that innovation and technology brought, but the fact that those tires would be used by big heavy SUVs would not serve the purpose of actually reducing emissions from the automotive industry. And how would they change to go into a different overall mobility model, which actually the whole automotive industry right now in France is working on. I wouldn't say that these employees have been the triggering point of this, but they are very much part of that conversation. And they include, interestingly, a wide range of people from, very young people to much more, senior research and development engineers, operations people, and not only corporate social responsibility people, as you would expect. So it's ongoing, but I think indeed it's very promising.
Fantastic. So, Renee, turning to you, let's imagine you are working with one of the corporate CEOs that Emmanuel has described, who's bright, but perhaps not as much in touch with his heart or her heart as they need to be. What's the conversation that you would have with them?
Yes, well, that's a lot of what I do. So love speaking to this. And I just want to also really share my enthusiasm for what's been articulated in this session thus far. And particularly, I believe strongly that channeling the energy that's there is what I'm hearing across what we're all talking about. It's the skill to know how to channel and direct the energy that's currently there, with whether it's with employee groups, communities, versus thinking that we have to try to get people on board and we have to get people to care. It's actually there. How do we channel it skillfully, effectively, which is pretty hard to do. So when it comes to working with a CEO, what I find is, I think we all kind of know this intuitively, but we forget that it starts always with ourselves, right? So yes, huge scale of the issue, it's incredibly complex, but we have to start with ourselves as the fundamental unit of change agency. And so I refer to this as attuning, right? So how do we attune, be grounded, connected with our own experience, and that includes our own anxiety, our own ambivalence, and our own aspiration, before we can even think about how we want to engage other people in any kind of wholesome and healthy way. Because if we don't do that, we're skipping over that, and we're actually trying to often unskillfully make people change, get people to change. So I start with that basic unit of, where are you at with this? And let's look at what might be overwhelming or maybe threatening, or how does this stretch your identity? For a lot of leaders, this is really gets to the crux of, who am I? And what does this mean if I start to engage, and am I more of an activist now? And there's a lot of stuff that can come up for business leaders around our relationship with activism, and a reticence. So it's really about looking at how are we engaging and relating. And then from there, it's incredibly important to give our people, your people as leaders, permission to be wherever they are, right? So I often advise leaders to show up as fully human, to show up as fully, as transparent as you can possibly be with where you're at, with what is inspiring you and what the North Star is, as well as what is scaring you and what your own edges are, because then that gives the community of, whether it's employees, stakeholders, boards, this permission to want to lean in and say, well, how can we look at this together? What can we do together? As opposed to the strong default to come in with, I know what the solution is. That's a model of leadership. I'm wondering if, Emmanuel, if you agree. I think that's an old school model where we feel like we have to know. In fact, we have to come in saying, I don't know, and show a level of humility that then enables, I don't care who you are in the organization and what level you're in, this sense of, oh, there's a window here, there's something for me to contribute. Because that's the bottom line, is how do we create those conditions where every single human being experiences themselves as part of this story. The role of the leader is an incredibly important part of that kind of almost energetic, if you will, of kind of setting that stage and setting the foundation. And I really feel strongly, since this is a session on skills, I want to really underscore that these are not easy things to do. This is actually work that requires training, that requires, I love, Meredith talked about, I heard you say the word guide, I heard you use the term coaching and mentoring, that it's okay to acknowledge that these are kind of high bar human capacities. When we're working on such urgency and such high stakes, it's very, very hard to show up in this way with that capacity to hold space, to be vulnerable. And I think it's healthy to name that and say, how can we learn and grow together?
Well, I think that's an inspiring and instructive note to end the conversation on before we turn over to Q&A, that climate skills start with perfecting human skills. Mm-hmm. Who has a question for our brilliant panelists? There's some at the front.
thank you. Thank you for the panel. And my name is Anton. I work at PepsiCo. I have a question for Emmanuel. You mentioned resources across companies, groups that come together to figure out what to do. Could you mention what they are? And then a second follow-up question to that is also, what are the metrics that you're using internally? Within PepsiCo, we have somewhat we have great goals, but we're only measuring financials right now on individual development goals, right? Like what's my salary, my bonus, my job dependent on is only the growth of the company, not sustainability. So how do you deal with that within Danone? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. The collectives, sometimes they have names. In France, there is a name. They call themselves Les Collectifs. And they have a website. You can go and find them, but there are a number of other countries, obviously. It's really interesting to see how collective they are. Very horizontal organizations, co-coaching and listening and etc. And they're running through deep time walks and the things that I think we leaders should be doing more often to open our chakras. To your questions about how do we measure at Danone, it was a super interesting conversation. I referred back to what I said about it took us 4 years before we started. But after that 4 years, we decided in 2009 that for the 15,000 team leaders at Danone, part of their bonus, yearly bonus, would be related to carbon footprint and individual contribution of their team to the carbon footprint of the company, the Scope 3 carbon footprint. I can tell you, we didn't have a clue how we would measure that. And there was, just to tell you one thing, is many of us said we should start very small, like 5%, because of the bonus, because we don't know how to measure. So we are going to waste money on bonuses. And some of us, and I was part of them, said, no, let's start very big because we don't want to waste money. So if we have a very big objective, I'm sure that we will find the money and the skills to know how to measure. So we decided that there would be a third of the total.
Just when we're getting to the exciting bit. He's back.
Sorry.
We lost you for a moment.
Okay, so I was saying, I will be short, sorry. I was saying that we decided that we needed to go big immediately on climate, on the bonus for employees. So only 1/3 of the total bonus of employees was going to be on economics and financials. 2/3 would be on management, skills, organization, and social and environmental. And 1/3 of that would be carbon. After 1 year, we had made sure that we knew how to calculate product by product the footprint of carbon for the company. We did that with SAP, a software company, and many others. And so the simple answer is that when I was not the CEO, but just before that, for 4 years, the profit of the company was weighting as much as the carbon footprint reduction of the company yearly in my own bonus. So this, I can tell you, is a complete change of mindset, because suddenly, people see in the company that the management, the CEOs are consistent and they're putting the money of the company where their mouth is. And that makes a big difference. And back to what Renee said, it's hugely frightening for leaders to do this. And it needs, to connect yourself deeply with what you truly believe is essential for that your role is in order to go into these kind of directions. Sorry, I've been long.
Thank you.
Thank you. We know that the energy sector is typically very male-dominated. I wondered if you could comment on how we upskill in a gender-just way for the future.
Definitely. So this is something I'm really obsessed with because our network is about 50% women, about 70% people of color, and that is not what the energy sector looks like in any way. The energy sector actually primarily, the average age is between 55 and 60, and that's also in renewable energy. and close, and I think it's about 25% women. I might be messing that up. And so I think what it really takes, and this actually goes beyond gender, this goes for almost any equity-seeking group, is it does take a robust intention with which you want to pursue these challenges, and an acknowledgement of the fact that if you're not working with more diverse people, you're not going to actually be getting into community, and if people can't come with you, and you see this around the world, you start to lose the voters and the consumers who are making this push. So what it takes often is you need more than one person. You ideally need between like 2 and 5 in a cohort who can work together. You need people who they can relate to, or who are literally trained to be kind of more empathetic and have a better coaching relationship with people. And then you need to start young. So you need to start kind of people who have a positive experience before they are 25 with project delivery or something of that nature, are uniquely kind of qualified to keep tackling these challenges later, and also if you're able to build community, we're very focused on global community, because you do often feel very crazy when you're doing this work at the right level, which we need to do it. And then especially if you're coming from a community of color or from the background of a woman who's the only woman in the room, it's really challenging to be there. So you do need your community who you can lean on as well.
We have another question over there.
Hi there, Claire Daly from Sustrans. We're a sustainable transport charity, and I know it's been really interesting hearing about the chat around energy. My question, and I think it'll be directed at everyone, but there's a lot of the chat in terms of decarbonising transport, and if you say decarbonising transport, people go, yeah, switch to electric vehicles and all the problems are solved. Not everybody sees it that way, and my question for Emmanuel first would be, what, if anything, is your corporation doing about encouraging employees to take the bus to work, to walk and cycle to work, to change the cities in that kind of a way? And ditto for Marie, very interested in the net zero city in Kilmarnock. And then is there anything, Meredith, coming up? I know energy is the primary thing, but given that transport emissions are such a huge part of carbon emissions, so I'm just wondering, are people genuinely looking at the more simple solutions like sustainable transport and active transport?
Yeah. Super. So your question actually takes us to time. So I'm going to ask each of the people who were asked the question just to give a rapid fire answer, and then we will wrap up.
Yeah, I can take that question. We have a huge transport solution. We have put over £1 million into electric bus, electric cars, partnering with Arnold Clark, electric bike hubs, for the community in the Halo and out with that community. And the data from that will then be monitored by Scottish Power and the Halo Enterprise and Innovation Hub, and create new sustainable jobs from that data, and look at the peaks and the troughs. So for me, we talk about cities and Sustainable Goal 11 by the UN, but we need to really home in on towns and rural economies and work in partnership and get young people from these economies into our towns that don't normally go out their postcodes. So we've got a huge transport solution there.
I think young people are really focused on the end goal, mobility, not necessarily cars, and I think there's a huge opportunity to lean into that.
So now we just need to get corporate CEOs taking the underground to work. Is that going to happen anytime soon, Emmanuel?
Well, my company car personally has been a very small electric car for 5 years. And that's the only car that I have used, actually. Other than this, in terms of our people transportation, we've done significant work on infrastructure, making sure that you would have rechargers, you would have bikes availability, and you would have incentives basically for people to take the right or the softer ways of mobility, including co-sharing, etc., etc. I don't think we've done anything very innovative on that front, but I do think indeed that CEOs like the rest of us need to apply that to themselves, which is a challenge, I can tell you.
Start with yourself, Renee's message. Brilliant. Please give a round of applause to our panelists.